Welcome to the webinar, Don't Lose the Deal, Proprietary Psychology is Different. I'm excited because we've got a great panel today. I've been asking exit strategies to do this for a long time because our clients are always talking about proprietary deal flow and best practices. Exit is the perfect company to tell us about this because that's what they do. They are a buy-side deal origination firm that's been involved in more than 75 deals. And they're not going to tell us all their secrets, but we'll hear about the psychological aspects of deal origination and some of the tools and processes they use and some benchmark metrics that you're going to find useful. With us from Exit Strategies are the President and CEO, Mark Wagner, Ed Harms, the Director of Sales, and Jordan Wagner, the co-founder of Exit Strategies and Manager of Deal Development. I'm Alan Siegert of Navatar. Jordan, so I suppose we ought to define what a proprietary deal is, although I suspect that everybody on this webinar already has a good idea of what a proprietary deal is. How do you define it?
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. And when we look at a proprietary deal at Exit Strategies, we really look at the first case is a direct relationship with the ownership or the founder of the business, as opposed to an intermediary like an investment bank or advisor who's putting the company up for auction. What we really focus on here, we try to be a new type of resource for business owners where, they may not want to go to a formal process, have their information out there, create a distraction for the company. That's not an option for them, but they do need an exit at some point. They don't have a succession plan. Maybe it's a third generation business and they know they need to take some liquidity and need some other alternative, but don't want to go to a larger process, but want to feel like they have the right company to work with. And that's really what our firm specializes in. So when you look at the proprietary deal advantages and what really comes with that, as I mentioned, it's the direct relationship with the owner. And we are uniquely positioned talking to hundreds of business owners every month, trying to get a sense of what they're looking for, what questions they might have about a process, and really try to educate them and have them understand that a private equity group can really help them, but they don't want, again, they're not looking at a larger process where you're bidding against 10 or 15 other private equity groups. You really get to meet the business owner and work towards a deal together. Hopefully, our goal is over the time that we build a relationship with the business owner, that by the end of the deal, you don't feel like you're negotiating. You feel like you're both working towards closing a deal that you both want to be partners together. And I think that's the biggest advantage that we bring. Of course, there's no auction where you're going forward and just bidding back and forth against competitors. Could be value on the buy or the terms, of course, but really we think the relationship is the biggest key there, and that's what we focus on. When you look at the challenges of proprietary deals, I think the biggest one is that you have to do more work educating the business owners, more work, kind of a slow walk down this path with less certainty. The business is not up for sale. It's more nuanced than that. Usually the business owner's taking a call. He's received some interest from you and he wants to hear why this might make sense. And we've talked to several business owners where this could go either way. And based on how you interact with that business owner during the time determines whether or not he might be willing to do so. So I think when you look at a challenge there, it's that you may feel like you're risking some time where you don't have a certain guarantee that the business owner is going to sell. But as we show you through this presentation, we feel there are ways to increase your odds and provide more certainty that over time the numbers will come in your favor. And while you won't close all of the proprietary deals you work on, you can increase the odds and know which ones to focus on. And that's really where we come in. When you look at the information that the business owner sends you, obviously a private business owner, maybe an older guy who's run his business for 50 or 60 years, he may not have the deal packaging and the numbers perfectly laid out the way many private equity groups are used to seeing from an investment bank. And you might have to work through that, be patient, and teach or coach the owner through that process of why you need certain information, because they can be easily overwhelmed by a massive data request that they don't understand the use for it, and it might let them paint the private equity as the suits or financial guys that they're not, typically looking to work with. So it takes a certain level of patience and nuance to understand the business owner and what they're looking for. They need a little hand-holding, and I'll pass it to Mark to tell you a story about that as we move forward.
Thank you, Jordan. About a year ago, we had what we considered pretty close to a perfect target. He was a specialty niche manufacturer, 11 million in revenue, about almost 5 million in EBITDA, and he had cleverly constructed a way that there wasn't much competition for what he did. The one issue was that he was a little prickly, a little defensive. He was going to sell 100% of his business. He had management in place, but he was scared and defensive and wanted to make sure people had the money and asked for some things that were a little unconventional. He needed some hand-holding. I met with him in person, and he was a lot better in person than he was on the phone. But as most people know, most of these proprietary deals start with a phone call, and a lot of people just weren't willing or comfortable. Specifically, there was one person we introduced that just didn't want to do the hand-holding necessary. The deal closed 3 months later with a strategic. It definitely was one of those things that we knew was going to close. It was a good business, and it had a lot of upside. And I think it's important that if you're going to be in proprietary, you need to be versatile sometimes to get these deals done. You did have to overcome the principal's personality, but after that, everything else was good. I'm going to turn this over to Ed, and I'll be back to talk to you later.
Thanks, Mark. That's a scenario we've seen many, many, many times. So let's talk about some of the fundamentals that underpin building a successful search and a successful proprietary deal origination engine. Process orientation, timing sophistication, discipline, and as we've been already discussing, a unique psychological approach. Many investment enterprises really view the origination process as a kind of undisciplined, a haphazard rush to an initial handshake. And this perception is really so powerful in the space that we see many investment enterprises, they really don't even acknowledge origination as part of the overall continuum or deal process. And we think that is a very, very, very big mistake. As in a very sophisticated sales process, so many challenges that we see emerging late in the deal process that sometimes even prove not just damaging to the process, but fatal to it. Some of these factors could have been surfaced earlier and dealt with far more effectively, even in the origination process before the company and the private equity or investment group became fully engaged. I'm talking about a myriad of possibilities here when it comes to issues. It could be, properly identifying all the centers of influence, surfacing that wild card equity holder, for instance, or timing the introduction of the investment group with a potential seller around a company's significant litigation issues, or perhaps a major sales or a business development success. It could be any number of things that, if surfaced early, fleshed out and prepared for, could have been managed much more adroitly than if it was brought up late in process. So one of the organizing principles that we really believe in to optimize deal flow and quality is really formalizing and structuring the origination process so that it seamlessly, as seamlessly as possible anyway, folds into the overall deal-making process. This structuring the process really translates for us into a number of components. As I mentioned, process orientation. We really want to treat and believe the origination process should be treated in the same way that a very sophisticated sales organization that's animating a very complex sales process would view the front end of their solution sale. Same attention to detail, the same sensitivity to nuance is required. Then we move on to timing, sophistication, timing mechanisms. You know, we don't agree that timing is everything. We don't agree with that, but it sure is really, really, really important. So we put timing mechanisms in place that we think are critical to the health of a deal process, and you know, when that introduction is made, it has a huge bearing on the ultimate outcome of a proprietary deal process. And then we move on to discipline. The decisions we make in behalf of our investor and private equity clients regarding how to engage and when to engage, we make sure they're driven heavily by a process, by analytical measures, not just gut feelings or what may be pretty poorly informed intuitions.
Ed,
We call that discipline.
Ed, can I throw in a story on timing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We had a deal we were excited about, a software deal, and the private equity, the investment company, was also very excited about it. And as we got a little further into it, and you know, the subject of valuation became more definitive, the private equity talked about it and decided to pass because it was a little above where they wanted to pay. The company did have explosive growth, and they were not rushing the deal, but they were pretty firm on their valuation. And this was a timing thing. I think I got a call a few months later after the deal had closed, and you know, the private equity had said we probably should have done something there, and with the growth they were having, we probably would have been in the ballpark if we hung in there a little longer on the timing. And I think it goes back to what I said in the first story. With the proprietary deals, I think a lot of versatility is important, because sometimes you're not really, at least initially, competing against anybody else, so you can somehow slow walk it in or use some other strategy. You may get the deal rather than a quick pass. So that's another illustration of something that happened here. I'm going to pass it back to Ed, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks,
Mark. So, you know, the fourth of these, this list of four that we have here, the unique psychological approach, really, what we see, frankly, is that the proprietary deal really does have to be managed. I think the anecdotes Mark has offered really illustrates that. Really have to be managed differently in a lot of respects. It's interesting. We work with 68 investor and private equity groups, and it's our estimate that about 75% of the clients we work with, when we began working with them, we felt really weren't in sync with the psychological demands of working with an owner on a proprietary deal basis, where they were, you know, unpackaged and coming to the table in a far different place than many of our clients were used to dealing with someone. So let's go back a little bit. Let's go back to process orientation and dig in here a little bit, and let me explain a little further about how we view that. I'll elaborate on each of these points just a little bit if I can. One of the most important, one of the most common and costly fault lines in proprietary deal origination is kind of what I call the Wild West, or what we call the Wild West mentality many private equities and investor groups bring to the front end of the process. So our goal in working with a client is to help them to bring the same type of rigor and structure and analytics to deal origination that they are so good at bringing to due diligence on the back end of a deal process. So to get specific, what are some of the pieces of that process orientation? Well, one thing we do is we have developed a proprietary classification process for prospective deals. We classify all prospective sellers using fixed and usually highly objective criteria. In some cases, for a very specific and unusual type of search, we'll even develop customized classifications for that particular search. What we're looking for there with what I call classification systems is to create internally a very shared, highly objective language around opportunity. The thought being we want to expunge or take out as much subjectivity as we can using these classification systems. So in the end, these systems allow us and ultimately our client to allocate their best resources against the highest quality of opportunity. We then move on to put management protocol in place. We establish flexible guidelines, but guidelines nonetheless, for how each classified opportunity, each classification should be managed. We then move on to rules of engagement, where we formalize and define when the introductions should be made and to who. So we're looking to orchestrate the right investor to the right opportunity at the right time, and rules of engagement tend to give us some structure there and help to advance that critical objective. Then we move on to a system of structured internal review that we take an opportunity through before it even reaches our client. And then when we do trigger the introduction, we're looking to bring about an extensive pre-engagement briefing for our private equity investor client, just to ensure that when that first meeting happens, that first impression, which you only have one opportunity to make, that everybody is well aligned. So let's move on to talking a little bit about timing sophistication in this process, and it's in the role of timing mechanisms. So let's talk a little bit about timing sophistication here. An analysis that we've done, more or less a forensic analysis we've done, has led us to conclude that up to 10 or 15% of the deals that fail in negotiation, we call them disengagements, are largely or solely attributable to significant timing issues. Now, you could argue that it's hard to make that kind of a definitive statement given all of the abstractions that are involved in a deal negotiation, and the point's well taken. But by using a number of analysis methods, look-back methods, we really feel very comfortable about this number. It's very, very high. The destructive impact of mistimed deal process can be explained, we think, by a kind of I don't know how else to put it, but a kind of attention deficit that kind of exists in the proprietary deal space, a kind of a fixation on the now, and that's especially true of firms that are involved in origination in this space. So we really work really hard at chronologically pipelining opportunity and having the patience that's required to make sure that investment, that potential opportunity, gets its best opportunity as far as timing. So in the final analysis, we're probably as interested and probably as focused on placing that opportunity in the right chronological place in our pipeline as we are with selecting the right investor to entertain it, the right client for it. So that's how important we think it is. Let's move on to just talk for a moment about what we call discipline. Our first discussion or series of discussions with a prospective seller who's maybe thinking about a capital event or at least open to one, that first conversations that we have with them, or the first series of conversations we have with them, really can have a lot of the same kind of convoluted perspectives, lack of proportion, and balance that could be associated with a first date. I mean, it really is conducive to generating a lot of instincts, gut feelings, intuitions that may not be exactly in alignment with the reality. Those types of things invade our thinking quickly. They can skew a process by causing us to engage one of our clients too early, or perhaps selecting the wrong client, or perhaps just promoting and pushing at what is at the time a weak position. So for us, we have a heavy reliance, as I've already outlined, on process and protocol. I want to say that, you know, for those of you who are listening who have decades of refined instincts and intuitions over many deals, we're not arguing against the role of instinct and intuition and gut feelings in proprietary deal origination, or in any deal for that matter. But we think those instincts, if you will, those intuitions have their place, and they need to be kept in their place. So in essence, what we're trying to do is to create a very effective, very elegant process that accommodates intuition, but doesn't completely rely on it. So that's kind of what we internally call discipline. So let's move on to the fourth component, which Jordan's been talking about. I think Mark's been giving us some real world situations, many of which may have resonated with your own experience in the deal negotiating and making process. This different psychological approach. Let me try to illustrate what we're really talking about here. If you were to contemplate a transaction, let's say two different types of transaction environments. For instance, it'd be ludicrous to contend that a retail transaction that you conducted over the counter of a department store, where the buyer walks in and knows exactly what they want and need, if you were to compare that transactional environment with a situation where you have to deal with the psychological dynamics of finding the buyer, uncovering their need, you know, building vision, creating alignment, solving overt and abstract problems, and then and only then negotiating the transaction. I mean, they are very radically dissimilar environments. So clearly, your approach in these two transactional situations would be radically different. I think we could all accept that. And we could also accept that it would be disastrous to use the same type of approach in both of these different situations. So we commonly see in our private equity clients that it's a matter of understanding the difference between building a deal, which Jordan referred to earlier, and bidding on one. Way too often, and I think we could tell you hundreds of stories, and you might have experienced. You're in conversation, you're in a discussion with the business owner, the seller, and he's beginning to feel like he's interrogated. He's beginning to feel like there's a bright light over his head, and he gets asked one of 6 or 7 questions that were clearly misaligned with where he's at psychologically, and he turns and in frustration says, "Well, you called me. You called me. I'm not chasing you. You called me." Well, when we get that type of response from a business owner, it's a cringeworthy moment for us, and it's time for damage control, because it shows that somewhere we've lost alignment with where that business owner is. So the reality, from our view, that has to be embraced is that when a business owner engages an investment bank, they get packaged, they get investment ready, they've already gone down what is a long road for them, an expensive long road, full of all kinds of psychological challenges and difficulties, so that by the time they get to the table to talk to an investor, to talk to a private equity, they are in a very, very different place than when you deal on an origination basis where they haven't gone through that process. Most of our proprietary deal owners have not been down that road yet. They haven't taken that journey. And to pretend that they have, or that they're aware of what the journey entails, big mistake. A failure to recognize and adjust to this reality is often not only bad for the deal, but can be fatal for it. Mark, you have any other anecdotes to support that?
Yes, I do. Perfect timing, Ed. I was ready to go. You know, the biggest thing I believe everybody can take out of this presentation, at least one of the biggest things, is this proprietary call, this first call, needs to be a conversation, not an interrogation. Ed mentioned that, and I think it's one of the biggest mistakes we see, and things can go south really quick. Business owners have their own set of egos and defensive postures, and we understand that there's hundreds of questions that an investor needs to ask, but they need to get them in a conversational tone and not feel like someone's answering a checklist worth of questions. You only have that one chance to make a first impression, and we want to try to do it right. You're dating, you're not engaged yet, and it's got to be treated that way. And it is probably the biggest thing we see, and we see it more often than we want to see it. There are some people who are really, really good at that first call, and there are others who, struggle with it and handle it in that interrogation type of way. One of the recommendations we have for this situation is to, if it's affordable to the budget of the investors, to have a point person in their office who handles this most of the time, and it's kind of assigned proprietary calls is one of the things they do. They tend to get good at it. They tend to have a nice, calm way of going about it, and it makes a big difference rather than just slipping different people in all the time, and you don't know what you get. So if you need to take one thing, I think that's an important thing as a takeaway from the presentation. I'm going to hand it back to Ed, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mark. So just to summarize then, what we've really talked about here very, very, very briefly are the elements of these key cardinal elements that underpin a successful proprietary deal origination process, timing, discipline, and the unique psychological approach. We really believe that for any enterprise to build that proprietary deal generating engine successfully, that these cornerstones can't and shouldn't be just abstractions, just ideals that they sign on to. It's really got to be infused in and integrated in everything they do on an executable basis every single day. It's got to be into the fabric of how the enterprise performs. So just to wrap up, I mean, we ensure this rubber meets the road approach to these components by classification systems to create a common language around opportunity to suppress subjectivity, opportunity management protocols by class, customized rules of engagement to ensure timing and discipline, and then a rigorous internal investment review and an extensive pre-engagement briefing with the investor group or the private equity to make sure that they understand and can communicate effectively to the psychological positioning of the prospective seller. So all of these elements, we believe, as you build your own internal engine or look for someone to help you with it, are mission critical to an individual search's success and building a powerful, efficient, effective, profit-generating deal origination engine in the proprietary space. But even with a focus on all these elements of process, it's not without its distinct challenges. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that, Jordan?
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate it. And whether you're building a deal origination engine for your internal team or working with an outsourced team, there's definitely challenges with it. And I think most of the people attending today would agree with that. And I think the first one is very simple, is that deal origination is a full-time job. We have many clients who will have a good year and then may be a little bit behind the next year and have to close a few deals, and they want to start up and start saying, okay, so how do we go about finding proprietary deals? And it just doesn't work. The lead time that you need, we think, is really kind of 2 years of a constant effort until we see the deal flow start popping up monthly, where you just have continuous actionable deals to work on. There is a long lead time to that, because most of the deals we have under LOI today were people we started building a relationship with with over 24 months ago. So that's really gives you a sense of how much focus needs to be on that area. Another challenge is maintaining relationships with business owners and founders of businesses when you know that if you look at a larger segment of the number of companies, most of them will not be deals. And you have no way of predicting which deals are going to close. So you have to treat them all like they might be that deal that is going to be the next one. You have to maintain those relationships, and it takes effort, it takes time, and it takes an internal team to do so. We find another important aspect is creating your own narrative and defining what you want. And as you guys know, many private equity groups, based on the system today with investment bankers, are reactive. They wait for deals to come in and then decide which may or may not make sense for their fund. And it's not so easy to be proactive and decide what you want to target ahead of time. But doing that helps proprietary deals. It resonates with business owners, and it creates a narrative where the business owners can respond to it and understand how you're trying to operate. So if you're looking at starting a search in an industry or a segment and you want to go about that, how would you do that? And when we look at it is, and I'm going to repeat myself a few times here because I think it's important, it really is a numbers game. As much as we try to place emphasis on process, on materials, on relationships, we really believe that you have to have a certain amount of volume in order to get the results you're looking for. So for us, if we're going into a space or a sector, we think about 200 companies that we think we are privately held and are worth calling would be the minimum in order to go after that sector. For us, it's definitely important to create a strong narrative. We want a business owner to understand the vision of the private equity and our firm. Why are we going into their space? Sometimes we'll say, this industry is fragmented and we believe there's a roll-up opportunity here and we believe you could be the platform there. But taking them behind the curtain and letting them understand the vision really resonates with business owners because they're not financial analysts, but they are very sharp. And if you can explain the larger vision and how you think you can grow this business to something more, that resonates with many business owners. It's very important if you have a long view approach, which is critical here, to create a presence in the space you're looking at, whether that's attending trade shows, you're calling on companies, meeting with business owners. You really want to create a presence and let the industry know that your firm is targeting that space. As I mentioned before, you can't predict where these deals are going to come from. And we've had several deals that come from referrals from people who we met with many times who indicated they had no interest in selling, but they wanted to hear more about our plan in the space, what our client was looking to do. And then they ended up calling us and saying, I'm not looking to sell, but one of my friends is in a similar business, and I told him about what your plan is, and I think you should meet. And sometimes those are the strongest leads we get. Lastly, I'd say it's very important to know when to end a search or when you're in a weak industry. We went to an industry last year where a high percentage of the business owners we contacted had already been contacted by a strategic buyer who was paying prices that, frankly, private equity just wouldn't match. They had a strategic reason to roll up the industry. And after a few months, we realized, even though it was supposed to be a year engagement, that it would have been a waste of time for both our client and us because the competition there was just too much. The differential in price was too great, and it was time to end that search. And I think that's an important one, as we only have so much time, and knowing where to spend it is crucial. As you look at the numbers of this, and I mentioned it's a numbers game, we break down our numbers and we rounded out the percentages here, but this is very accurate to our database. When you look at 1,000 companies we've contacted and you break down that 50% are not interested and 10% of those companies have institutional investors, and this is after we've used the internet and different databases to check that they did not have investors, but they're private companies and it's not always available. And we go through the business owners who did not respond. That 1,000 companies breaks down to about 50 companies who have some level of interest. However, most of those companies will be too small for a private equity investment. Private equity groups tend to look for the best of the best in this country in businesses, and most companies, if you look at the numbers, are far below that point. So out of 1,000 companies, we usually end up with 5 to 10 platform opportunities, and not all of those opportunities will close, but they will be there for, for us to work on, and hopefully a few of them can get to the finish line with some of our clients. So why does outsourcing make sense? Why would using a firm like Exit Strategies make sense? Well, first, we really put a full-time focus on origination, and I think whether your firm is doing this internally or outsourcing, it's not possible just to call a small number of companies or work on this from time to time. It really just takes a continuous effort, week after week, month after month, of developing relationships, building the pipeline, and you just don't know where these deals are going to come from. Ed mentioned we focus on psychology. We really try to understand the business owners, what they want, what they're looking for, and what their timing looks like, and hopefully over time those things develop into deals. But we have no way of predicting which ones those are, and I think that's a big metric, because if a private equity knew which couple of deals were most actionable, you'd have the ability, the resources, and the time to focus on them. But it's really about focusing on many deals, and very few are actionable, and using a firm like Exit Strategies allows you to focus on only the actionable leads, while we kind of bring these deals and build them until they're ready for you guys to move on. The in the trenches feedback, as we call them, is the reports and the information we pull from every business owner, whether they are not interested, too small. We try to have a dialogue and understand what's going on in their industry, who else has been contacting them, what have their competitors sold for, are there any competitive dynamics that they want to talk about. But when we call thousands of business owners, this feedback really develops and creates a competitive advantage for our clients when they go into an industry. Usually if our clients are buying a platform in the space, they've already spoken with, or we have, 50 to 100 businesses in that same space, and that feedback is very, very helpful as time goes on. The cost savings, I think, is the most simple answer here. It would take a team internally, full time, to focus on this, and a year or two lead time before you see true results. And I think that is a big investment for most private equity groups, unless they are planning on having a full-time origination team for the foreseeable future. So I think outsourcing it allows us to focus on origination while you focus on actionable deals, and continue to focus on closing deals. I'm going to pass it over to Alan. I'm sure there are some questions.
Yes, if you have questions, please enter them in the GoToWebinar control panel over on the right side of your screen. We have a question from Tyler, who asks you to elaborate a little more on what type of classifications or metrics you use when you're evaluating potential companies.
Well, that's a great question, Alan, and Tyler, thank you for that. Let me take a first pass at that. Tyler, what we're doing with classifications and the building of metrics around classifications is really a very, very careful, long thought out a marriage between soft and hard data points. So we're looking at things like fully understanding centers of influence. How fully do we understand the decision-making topography within the enterprise? We're looking at the contextual analysis of the space that surrounds the business space that they're in. We're looking at health, age, and lifestyle factors of the major C-level players. We're looking at we're measuring temperament, and then we're marrying those to a lot of mostly hard data points, probably between 6 and 15 data points that have to do with an analysis of the status of the business and its direction and measuring its momentum. So it's a marriage of the soft and hard data that we spend a lot of time in creating classifications, and when we do the right work on that, it has an enormous impact on ensuring quality control of the origination process.
Yeah, and I'll add to that answer, Ed, and I believe it was Tyler, when we have an employee who has a first call, or we build a relationship with a business owner, and we look at that classification, there's several stages of that business. So it could be a very strong business financially, but valuation is too high and the owner's not fully committed to sell, and maybe there's some debt on the business, and those things go in and create an end grade. So when we go to our meeting, we have a hard data point that says what we grade this business as likelihood of closing. It helps us a lot. In the beginning, we were trying to use all instinct, but it's difficult to do that. And when we go to our investment meetings, these data points really help us to say, okay, So now we have a business that has a reasonable valuation. The owner has a situation where he needs to sell in the immediate future, and he has a reasonable, expectation of deal timing. Okay, we should place more focus here as opposed to maybe a more attractive business, but there's not as much motivation there.
Okay, we've got a question from Bill. Have you observed any changes in the receptivity of owners being contacted by email or phone? And I guess I wonder, do you ever get actually through to the owner, or are you going to be hitting a voicemail system and leaving a message there? How does that all work for you?
So generally, and this is a funny statistic, it takes us 3 calls and 3 emails before we get through to a large business owner. And when I categorize large, I would say over 5 million of EBITDA. And that really shows you how long it takes for a business owner to realize that you are serious. They get a lot of cold calls and a lot of emails. So we are hitting them with both to really show that, hey, we're interested. We know you have other people contacting you, and whether it's a letter, phone call, or email. I would say the vast majority of responses are through email, but as we look at our numbers, when we receive phone calls back, those tend to be the more serious business owners. So that's always a good sign for us. But in terms of numbers, you get more feedback via email.
If I could add to that just a little bit, I think that's a great question. It's important to recognize that these owners are bombarded. I mean, the space is saturated with all kinds of approaches and whatnot. So we spend a lot of time developing approach strategies, and we have a number of proprietary strategies we use. We kind of call it reaching the unreachable. So, for instance, if we have a client that wants to do an add-on and they've got 80 potential prospects for the add-on, a typical origination effort might involve engaging in meaningful contact with maybe 60 or 55 of those 80, using the approach strategies that we've developed and the reaching the unreachable type of strategy that we adopt. We'll come up with 70, 75 of those sometimes, and the extra exposure to the extra 10 or 15 prospects on that search can mean the difference between a wildly successful add-on search and a modestly successful or an unsuccessful one. So it's a great question. Approach is absolutely critical in the origination process.
Okay, Steve asks, where do you get the data you need or use to find deals, and how do you handle it?
Yeah, so it's Jordan again. When we look at and I assume he means the list of companies that we're going to approach, it's really from a variety of sources. So if our client gives us an industry, or sometimes they'll even send us a company and say, we like companies similar to this. We missed on this deal, but we'd like to see others like it. What we will do is we'll use the Cap IQs, PitchBooks, Data.com, Hoovers to pull SIC code lists. We'll then go to industry associations and try to find those lists, as well as trade shows, which we will attend, and pull the list from those. And our research team will dig through the list to try to pull the top quartile of those companies, and we'll work our way down. So we're trying to call the larger companies first, and hopefully by the end of the search, we may have a platform, and the companies we contacted throughout that search can be candidates for add-ons.
And not to make Alan blush, but Navatar is a critical component of helping us to orchestrate all of this data. Absolutely central to just about everything we do.
Okay, thank you. And Tyler actually has a follow-up question, and I did not plant this. He says, how are you using Navatar to drive value to your customers and add cash to your bottom line? I think you just started to answer that.
Yeah, and another area that we use Navatar is, one, it helps us stay organized and keep track of our leads. A lot of these leads are being pipelined, and over years and years of conversations, financial changes, and we need a way to track what's happened over that deal as opposed to what's just happening now. Additionally, we have guys calling 50 or 60 companies a day, and Navatar allows it to be scheduled. So if I tell a business owner, or one of our colleagues tells a business owner, we're going to call you in 3 months, that we call them exactly on the day in 3 months. When we look at the private equity side, we have a system with Navatar that Navatar worked with us to customize called our Exit Strategies Portal, where we enter data on a business that a private equity may be interested in, and we tell the private equity, okay, they have a username and password, they can sign in and actually see the revenue, EBITDA, growth, description of the business, and decide whether or not they are interested in that deal automatically, either from their phone or when they're on the road on the computer. So that's very helpful.
Okay, Steve asks, what are the size of your clients? Do you do venture as well, or mostly private equity or strategics, and why?
So the average client of ours is looking for $3 million to $15 million of EBITDA businesses. We have 2 clients right now on retainer, with one is $19 billion of assets under management and one is slightly larger than that. So it really varies. And for us, the size, as long as they're sizable deals, it's not a preference one way or the other. In terms of venture, we have been adding that to our repertoire recently. We originally just worked with private equity groups and strategics, but as we started to call in the software sector, we would develop relationships with business owners who would tell us, I like your process, I'm interested in doing something, but I'm not profitable yet, I'm far too early for private equity. And now we are just starting to get relationships with venture groups who may want to invest in those businesses.
Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. We have one more question from Bill. Can you outline how an engagement by a strategic buyer with you would work? How is the deal typically structured?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we used to, when we started this business, do year-long contracts, but we've decided that we go month to month with all of our clients as a preference, because we feel if at any time any of our clients does not feel like we're close to closing a deal, it's not worth either of us moving forward. So we generally have our clients on a retainer that's around $5,000 a month, and we continue to search for them in the sector they're looking, and then we are paid a success fee similar to a Lehman formula if a deal is to close. Was that the whole question, Alan? I'm not sure if Alan got cut off there.
Yeah, I'll take over for Alan. Oh, sorry.
No, I've got it here. We have one more question that's related to email. Where have you found success finding email addresses? I guess that's of targets.
Yeah, so email addresses is a very tricky one. We use Hoovers and Data.com to get a first look at what an email might be, and those are the simplest. But when we can't find them there, we have a variety of databases that will ping a server to check if an email is bounced back and try different variations. And additionally, we have a simple formula of generally first initial last name, then first name, last name, and so on, of what the most likely combinations are.
Okay. I think now Cindy's giving me the signal that we are out of time. I want to thank everyone for participating and your questions and for joining us for today. On the screen, you can see how to follow up if you have more questions. Also, Cindy will be sending you a link to the recorded version of this webinar. I want to thank the group from Exit Strategies, Mark Wagner, Ed Harms, and Jordan Wagner, and also Cindy Chow of our marketing department for setting this up. If your travels bring you to the financial district in New York, stop by and see us at Navatar. And we've just opened up a London office as well. I'm Alan Siegert of Navatar, wishing you a great day.